A primetime investigation. The Central Park Jogger. An explosive new confession.
When you first saw her, what was your intention?
To attack her.
Tonight, the crime that 13 years ago sent shockwaves through New York City. Police called it wilding, a young woman brutally gang raped by a pack of rampaging teens.
She was badly beaten. She was bloody, laying in mud, and she was just hours away from death.
It looked like an open and shut case. 5 teens quickly arrested. Their chilling confessions stunned the world.
A punch in her face, punch in her face, a punch, boom.
Did somebody have sex with her?
Yeah.
Did a lot of people have sex with her?
Yeah.
All 5 were sent to prison, but now, out of the blue, a serial predator steps forward and turns the case upside down.
Did you rape the Central Park Jogger?
Yeah, I did.
Did you do it alone?
Yeah, I was alone that night.
If he acted alone, why did these 5 young men confess? And what really happened in Central Park that night? Cynthia McFadden with a major primetime investigation.
From ABC News, this is Primetime Thursday with Diane Sawyer and Charles Gibson. Tonight, the Central Park Jogger, a primetime investigation.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Primetime Thursday.
And at the top of our broadcast tonight, we never knew her name, but what happened to a young woman in Central Park 13 years ago shook New York to its core and shocked the world. A night of random violence that ended in an act of unbelievable brutality, and it changed the way people lived their lives, made everyone here feel a little more vulnerable, and introduced us all to a new word, wilding, a new definition of urban terror.
So when 5 young teens confessed and were sent to prison, many people breathed a little easier. But now, more than a decade later, a dramatic and unexpected turn of events. Out of the shadows, a serial rapist has stepped forward with a new confession. In his first interview ever from a maximum security prison in upstate New York, he tells Prime Time he knows what really happened that awful night to the Central Park Jogger. And according to him, it is not what we thought. Here's senior legal correspondent Cynthia McFadden.
It is an unusually warm spring night in Central Park, that terrible night 13 years ago. Joggers and bikers are out in force. The regulars know that the North End and East Harlem, isolated and dark, can be dangerous. And on this moonlit night, police say roaming packs of teens, more than 40 kids, swoop into the park looking for trouble. The joggers make easy targets, and the night soon turns to terror. By dawn, a total of 12 senseless attacks. The assault of one man is particularly violent.
His head looked like it was dipped in a bucket of blood. It was that vicious of an attack.
But by far the most serious is an attack on a 28-year-old runner who takes a shortcut down a dimly lit road. She's not found until after 1 o'clock in the morning, in a coma and barely clinging to life.
A terror spree through Central Park.
Soon the whole world knows her simply as the Central Park Jogger.
A Wall Street investment banker jogging in the park last night was raped and battered unconscious by a marauding gang of teenagers.
A brutal gang rape, part of a night of random attacks called wilding.
Police are still questioning some of the young suspects they believe were involved in last night's attack.
You have the right to remain silent and to refuse to answer any questions. Do you understand?
Within 48 hours, the police have suspects and confessions to various crimes committed that night, including the attack on the jogger. The confessions stun the city. These are the actual videotapes. Suspect Antron McCrae is 15.
I grabbed one arm. This other kid grabbed one arm, and he grabbed her legs and stuff. And then we like, what's the chance getting on her? Like getting on top of her.
Raymond Santana, age 14.
And what was he doing with his hands?
He was covering her mouth. Every time she was talking, he was smacking. He said, sit up. He kept smacking her.
Kevin Richardson, also 14.
And he pushed her. He ripped her blouse off.
And finally, the only teen charged as an adult, 16-year-old Corey Wise.
This is my first rape. This this. I never did this before. This will be my last time doing it. This is my first experiment. This will be my last.
Word gets out, widely reported, that the suspects think their crime is a joke, that they even sing about it.
She wanted to do the wild thing.
Detective Herb Arroyo was the lead investigator.
They were chanting for a small amount of time, the wild thing.
You're certain of that?
Oh, it could be heard by many people.
Everybody started running, laughing and stuff.
They felt pretty good about what they'd done?
Yeah.
In Central Park, fellow joggers expressed their sympathy and their rage.
I know I just wanted to come up here, find somebody, and do bodily harm. I also wanted to take them after they get out of jail and put them in the gorilla cage in the park zoo, the new zoo, see if they could survive it. I think that's analogous to what they did to her.
You know, this park is so wonderful, and the running is so wonderful. To have these goddamn people ruin it, that's it. I would start cursing, so I better not.
There is anger over this incident that seems to have only grown in the days since the assault occurred.
For a city that has been simmering for years over the issue of race, this vicious crime with young black defendants and a white female victim brings the issue to the boiling point.
You don't think this would happen? You don't think we would be here if there was a black woman?
No, if it was a black woman, y'all wouldn't even be here. This city has two ways of dealing with crime victims. One when you're white, one when you're not.
You would like to execute them now. Is that your position?
The debate soon erupts on national television.
And these kids should be made examples for the rest of the country that if you do a crime, you're going to get convicted. If you're guilty, you're either going to jail or you're going to hang.
Say she survives. These rapists, the punishment has to fit the crime. Castrate them. They can't rape again.
14 months after the crime is committed, justice comes swiftly, with the first of 2 trials in the Central Park Jogger case. There is almost as much drama outside the courtroom as in it, and outside is where the cameras are. Defense attorneys argue their clients are innocent, pointing out that the semen sample taken from the scene, found on the jogger's socks, is a mystery and does not match any of the defendants. And as for those videotaped confessions, the defense argues they are false and were coerced.
How many times was she hit with the pipe?
Twice, in the ribs, in the side, and in the head.
But the judge permits the tapes to be played in court. They make a profound impression on the jury.
Did somebody take her clothes off?
Yeah.
Okay. Who took her clothes off her?
All of us.
Did somebody have sex with her?
Yeah.
Did a lot of people have sex with her?
Yeah.
In perhaps the most poignant moment, prosecutors call the jogger herself to the stand. She has made a remarkable recovery. Still, she has no memory of the attack, no memory of going jogging. She cannot identify any of the defendants. But that is not the prosecutor's point. Juror Ben Neal.
I mean, I felt sorry for the lady. She looked like she could hardly make it up to the stand, but I'm not sure, but I believe she had the cane with her.
Prosecutors say a blonde pubic hair found on the clothes of defendant Kevin Richardson is similar to the hair of the victim, but they provide almost no other physical evidence linking the defendants to the crime. For instance, none of the jogger's blood is found on any of the defendants. Angela Cuffey, sister of Kevin Richardson.
There was no evidence. There was no DNA. We were like, well, the truth is going to come out here. The jury has to see that there's no case here.
And now, after 8 weeks of trial and 10 days of deliberations, a struggling and divided jury has finally reached a verdict.
In the end, the confessions prove overwhelming. 4 of the defendants are found guilty of rape, 1 of sexual assault. 1 is also found guilty of attempted murder. All 5 are convicted of assault, riot, or both in the other attacks in the park that night.
I will never forget the look on Kevin's face when he heard the first guilty verdict. He turned and he looked at us, you know, and amazed. How could they find me guilty?
Lead prosecutor Elizabeth Lederer is cheered and booed just as loudly. The defendants' families take their rage out on the press.
I'm pleased that we have a verdict, and I think it's a fair verdict.
The defendants are sentenced to terms of 5 to 15 years. But police know someone else is still out there. Someone who raped the jogger and left his semen at the scene. What they don't know is that that rapist is still right under their noses, and that 13 years later, he would reappear and turn this case on its head.
Did you rape the Central Park jogger?
Yeah, I did.
Did you do it alone?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The Central Park Jogger, a primetime investigation, will return.
In 1990, 5 young teens were convicted of the vicious attack on the Central Park jogger. But were they sent to prison for a crime they didn't commit? Tonight, for the first time, a man who had never been under suspicion tells Primetime that he committed the crime. And you don't have to take his word for it. There is proof. Cynthia McFadden continues now with his dramatic first-person account of that night. Some of it is very graphic and chilling to hear.
Did you attack the Central Park jogger?
Yeah, I did.
Did you do it alone?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Did you rape her?
Yes.
Did you beat her?
Mm-hmm.
Did you leave her for dead?
I thought I left her there for dead. I didn't, she was out. When I look back, and I could, when somebody's nostrils, the nose or something might be broken and blood might be triggering to that, it sounds like a hard sound. And I heard, as I was walking away, I heard the heavy breathing.
This is Matias Reyes, in prison today. But back in 1989, at the same time the city is focused on the young defendants in the Central Park jogger case,
police are now warning women on
a violent criminal called the East Side Rapist is at large.
He sexually assaulted the victim and then stabbed her.
Raped and attempted to kill another woman.
What no one knows is that he is Matias Reyes. Then, 4 months after the jogger attack, and just blocks from where she was raped, Reyes is arrested and admits to robbing, raping, and viciously attacking 4 women and murdering one of them. And though he keeps his role in the Central Park case a secret, Reyes does tell detectives about his M.O., how he works alone, and about the sadistic choice he gave victims so they couldn't ID him.
I just told her, your eyes are your life, that's it.
You said to her, your eyes are your life?
Yeah, and I poked in the eye.
With the knife?
Yeah, with the butter knife.
He is a merciless killer, raping and stabbing a pregnant woman in her basement apartment, while her 3 children cried in the next room.
When she said, you stabbed me, I don't even know what. I kept on stabbing her, and I don't know in what places I got it. My babies were screaming, too.
Reyes is sentenced to 33 1/3 years to life in prison. But despite the fact that he attacked his victims only blocks from where the jogger was found, neither the police nor prosecutors made the link.
It was like a perfect crime. The only reason it didn't come up is because I got away with it.
Until now, and only because he's speaking out. And there is one indisputable fact that makes his confession credible. Remember the socks and the mystery semen? Investigators say the DNA is his, a match.
Walk me through your attack of the Central Park jogger.
He started following her as she ran north here on the park's main road. He drew us a detailed map of his route that night. He says the moment he saw her, he began running behind her.
But one of the things that drew me about her was her body and the spandex that she had on. So she also had a Walkman.
When you first saw her, what was your intention?
To attack her, to take everything that she had and to rape her. And that was already in my head. And as she proceeded to go along, she wasn't jogging that fast. So I zigzagged back and forth from the bridle path to the street.
He's stalking her, pacing her for several minutes.
Just keeping an eye on her, making sure, just timing it, because I wasn't sure she was going to go the long way or she was going to cut through the section that they got right here.
She turns left down the dimly lit shortcut.
she makes a turn. All this time, there's no sounds, no cars, nobody's going by. So next thing you know, as she proceeded to jog along, because it's a pretty long stretch here, right on the side, on the right-hand side, around the grass, I see a tree branch, tree stump branch, or whatever.
How big?
I can't remember exactly the size, but it could have been like this. Maybe it was pretty big. I had to grab it with both hands. I see that she's getting a little further, so I pick up speed. So I start running behind her. When I run behind her, I struck over the head, and I hit her right around here, inside the head. She fell forward.
And he shows us on his map where he says he first hit her. It appears to correspond to the crime scene photos where police found her blood.
As she fell forward, the Walkman falls off and all that. I can't remember exactly in which way I dragged her, but I know I dragged her in there, somewhere inside the bushes in my hair.
Again, the crime scene photos show the crushed grass, the drag marks where the jogger was pulled into the bushes. Before you struck her, was she even aware that you were following her?
No, this whole time, you gotta understand, she had, that's the only Walkman that she had on. It's a pretty, it goes pretty loud. She had the music pretty loud because I could hear the music behind her.
So she wasn't trying to run away from you at this point?
Nah, never. Like I said, from when I seen her here, all the way to down here to where I attacked her, she never sensed it. She never seen it. I took off her clothes and I draped her in there.
Now she was resisting.
She wasn't, the reason she wasn't fighting, because I think she was in shock. I think the blow was pretty heavy because she kept reaching over her head and screaming out the blood. And I asked her, can she give me the address to her house? Because I found some keys in a little black bag. It was made out of Velcro. And
a Velcro bag?
Yeah, one of those little bags that joggers sometimes wear around. I was trying to ask her about her address because I was trying to go to her house and burglarize her and all that.
He says she wouldn't tell him.
I think that escalated the anger or whatever. I know the beating proceeded from there. And at one time, I guess she was conscious and scared or whatever, and she ran away from me. She ran away. That made me more angry too, and the violence got more worse over there. I know I struck her with a rock. I left her there. I thought I left her for dead.
He says he left the park alone, just as he came in. Only now he was wearing her Walkman, her blood drenching the lower part of his pants. He says a policeman stopped him on the way out and asked him if he'd seen any kids causing trouble. Is Reyes telling the truth? The whole truth? Has everyone been wrong for 13 years?
Primetime returns to the crime scene with the lead detective, who says the forensic evidence indicates Reyes attacked the Central Park jogger, but he might not have been the first.
So you think that Mateus Reyes stumbles upon her, finds her virtually unconscious, and then rapes her?
That's correct. When Primetime returns.
Mateus Reyes' confession that he raped the Central Park jogger is backed up by DNA evidence. But what about his more explosive claim that he acted alone? The lead detective says you can't trust what this rapist and murderer says about that night. But there's more surprising evidence to come. Cynthia McFadden continues now with Primetime's investigation. And again, we have to warn you, the descriptions are graphic.
There's no question. The DNA proves that you raped the Central Park jogger. Did you do it alone?
Yeah, I was alone that night. Anytime I went out to do any of my crimes or anything like that, I was always alone.
But was Reyes really alone in the park here back in 1989? The truth is, his confession has put much of what was thought to be known about what happened here into question. Investigators are trying to sort it out. The first possibility, Reyes was alone and the 5 teenagers had nothing to do with the rape. Another theory, the jogger was attacked twice, once by Reyes and then separately by the teens. Or finally, that Reyes was with the group that night, the so-called 6th man who got away. These are the people who were convicted of either raping or sexually assaulting the Central Park jogger, and I want to ask if you know any of them. Do you know this man?
No.
Kevin
No,
Richardson.
No.
This man, Yusuf Salam.
Mm.
This man, Antron McRae.
No.
Raymond Santana.
Mm.
But Reyes does know one of the convicted men, Corey Wise.
That's Corey Wise. I had a fight with him in C-74.
C-74, that's Cell Block 74, Rikers Island. They met there in 1989. The two had a fight over the television. Both insist that that was the first time they'd ever met, and that Wise had no idea that Reyes had raped the jogger. And except for that incident I mentioned in the prison where the two of you don't know him.
No, man.
Reyes says back then he was pitiless and didn't care that Wise was doing time for the jogger attack. But that changed last year when the two met again in another prison. And this time, Reyes says after years of counseling and a religious awakening, he wanted to tell the truth.
What I didn't feel back in 1989, I felt it then. I said, it's time. I can't believe I let this man in here 13 years of his life for something that he didn't do.
Corey Wise says he was as surprised as everyone else. So you were not in Central Park with Mateus Reyes the night of April 19th?
No, ma'am.
You did not watch him rape the Central Park jogger?
No, ma'am.
You did not help him rape the Central Park jogger?
No, ma'am.
All the defendants or their lawyers tell Primetime the same thing. This is Yusef Salam.
I didn't participate by watching. I didn't participate by listening from a distance. I didn't participate by actually attacking this woman. I didn't participate at all.
Salam says he was in the park that night. At trial, he testified he had a metal pipe with him. But because of the pending investigation, his lawyer said we couldn't ask him about it. He served 7 years in a juvenile facility.
I have never heard, never seen. I didn't know anything about Mateus Reyes. Never saw him before in my life.
If I knew any of these people, don't you think that when I got arrested August 5th, 1989, they would have said, wow, he was the leader. Yeah, he was with us. I don't care how much secrecy and how much love there is in a friendship. I don't think that too many people gonna take a choke like that, of a crime like that, and say and hold it down for me. I don't think I ever have that much power over anybody.
In other words, somewhere along the line, one of the jail teens would have given him up, he says. It's common sense. A lot of people are going to wonder what you're getting for this confession. Mm-hmm. Has anybody offered you anything in exchange for your confession?
Oh, it's not that.
While some investigators tell Primetime they believe Reyes and the teens raped the jogger together, the lead detective on the case, who is now retired, has another theory.
No one ever saw this guy, Mateus Reyes. He wasn't described by anyone in the group. He doesn't even know anyone in the group.
So you do not think he was simply the sixth rapist in the sense that he was actually with the others that night?
No, he was not with the others that night.
You're certain of that?
I do believe he was at the scene. He admits to it. There's DNA that links him to it. But he wasn't with them at the time when they were all there.
Let me make sure I understand you. Mateus Reyes raped the Central Park jogger, but he was not there with the defendants.
That is correct.
So, when was he there?
I believe she was already raped, assaulted, and left down at the bottom of the hill there.
So you think that Mateus Reyes stumbles upon her, finds her bleeding from the head, virtually unconscious, and then rapes her?
That's correct.
So Detective Arroyo is convinced Reyes and the teens are all guilty. But what about the physical evidence? What theory does it support? We asked former New York City Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Michael Baden to review all the scientific testimony and to return to the crime scene and answer this question. Could one person alone have raped the Central Park jogger?
As I understand it, his statement that he alone raped her, hit her on the head, dragged her down to this area, saw nobody else, entirely consistent with the physical evidence and the forensic evidence.
Is the physical evidence more consistent with a gang rape or more consistent with a single perpetrator?
I think the physical evidence, including the lack of vaginal injuries, it's more, not impossible for gang rape, but it's more consistent with a single perpetrator.
Dr. Baden also says with as much blood as the jogger lost, this is the crime scene photo of her white T-shirt stained red. It is hard to believe not a drop was found on any of the teens. But what about the blonde hairs found on one of the defendants? At trial, prosecutors said they were consistent with the joggers. Primetime has learned that after Reyes came forward, the hairs were retested using new DNA technology, and they are not the joggers. So tonight, investigators tell us they are retesting everything. But sources say none of it so far links the teens to the rape.
We've scratched our head from day one on this. This was a case with very little physical evidence. This is a case that really was on the sole merits of the statements provided.
And so if those statements crumble, the case crumbles.
That would be fair to say.
But why would 5 teens confess to a crime they didn't commit?
Was what you confessed to about being there when the Central Park jogger was raped, was that true?
No, of course it wasn't true.
Then why did you say it?
When Primetime returns. Central Park jogger. So why did the other kids confess to police?
Steve was using a knife to cut her legs.
Were you just making up some of the facts as you went along?
Just to give them what they wanted to hear.
The lead detective isn't buying it.
The videotapes speak for themselves.
But do they? The Central Park Jogger, a primetime investigation, continues after this from our ABC stations. The Central Park Jogger, a primetime investigation. Once again, Charles Gibson.
The 5 teenagers were convicted of the attack on the Central Park jogger, largely based on their own words. But if Matias Reyes is right and he did it alone, then why would the teens, some with their parents by their side, confess to a brutal crime they didn't commit? Here again is Cynthia McFadden.
It's 1 a.m. in the 24th precinct, one day after the Central Park jogger was found raped and left for dead. And that night of videotaped confessions about assaults and a brutal rape begins. The first is Antron McCrae.
I grabbed one arm.
Then Raymond Santana.
He said, sit up. He kept smacking.
Kevin Richardson.
And he pushed it. He ripped the blouse off.
And several hours later, Corey Wise.
This is my first rape.
Today, he says it's difficult for him to watch himself that night.
That kid is scared. That kid is scared.
Have you told us the truth now?
Yes, ma'am.
When you see yourself at 16, what are you seeing?
A now ruined kid.
A now ruined kid?
Yeah.
All 5, who were convicted largely because of their own words, say those confessions were false and coerced. But Detective Bert Arroyo sat in on some of those confessions and says everything went by the book. The confessions were given voluntarily.
Yes.
The confessions were given without coercion.
Yes. I believe these kids did it. They said they did it. The videotapes speak for themselves.
Police say they interviewed more than 30 kids who were in the park that night, and many of them quickly focused suspicions on the 5 teens. Soon, the 5 made statements, putting themselves in the middle of the attacks, including the rape of the jogger. But the families tell a very different story.
They were telling us that Kevin is going to come home with us, that he's a good boy. They know he didn't do anything.
That he's a good boy?
Yeah, that he's a good boy, and they know he didn't do anything, and that we can take him home.
But this is not, of course, what happened. Anyone under 16 is supposed to have a parent with them during police questioning. But these parents say they suspect their children were questioned without them. Grace Cuffey is Kevin Richardson's mother.
Every 15, 20 minutes, I kept going to the door, and I said, look, I want to see my son. And they still wouldn't let us see them.
How long did this go on?
All night. All night? All night.
There were no kids questioned without a parent present. And every single written statement shows that clearly.
The parents signed them.
Parents signed them.
Also present are, I believe, your parents.
And parents were also there during the juveniles' videotaped confessions. So why didn't they object then? They say it was because police led them to believe their children were merely witnesses, not suspects, and that after making the tapes, they'd be released.
Had we known that they were going to turn around and say that he raped her, you think we would have let him do a videotape?
Inside the interrogation room, Yusuf Salam says the pressure was intense. with police playing different roles.
Some of them wanting to attack you, others holding them back, others telling you, you better tell us something. It could be almost tantamount to someone having a gun to your head. You're 15 years old, but you know sooner or later that bullet is going to come out. That's the type of feeling that I had.
As for Corey Wise, who says he was in the park that night and witnessed some of the other attacks, he says police accused him of lying, cursed him, and even slapped him until he would admit to being involved in the rape too. Police deny it.
Was what you confessed to about being there when the Central Park jogger was raped, was that true?
No, of course it wasn't true.
And why did you say it?
I just told him I was going to go home.
Your mom was waiting to pick you up.
Yeah. And I fell for it. The hokey doke. I fell for it.
When did it hit you? You weren't going home.
When the officer said you ain't going home, you're going straight to jail. You ain't going home. You got yourself a new home.
No one ever promised any of these defendants that they could go home. No one. Absolutely not. This is in their own minds.
So the parents are lying when they say that these promises were made.
They absolutely are lying.
I'm wondering whether you think it's possible that inadvertently the police or the prosecutors suggested to these young people what it is they wanted to, you in fact wanted to hear, and they just parroted it back.
Absolutely not.
No question.
Absolutely not.
I'm trying to place myself back in 1989, and a particularly heinous crime is committed.
I mean, this city
and
was...
the city is an outrage.
Professors Saul Casson of Williams College and Richard Offshee of Berkeley are two of the country's leading confession experts.
And there are these kids in the park making trouble. I understand why they brought them in. I understand the linkage. If you believe the person you're coercing is guilty, you can inadvertently coerce a false confession, when in fact they're not.
Both have testified numerous times for the defense. We asked them to review some of the evidence in this case, to tell us, is it possible 5 people could have confessed to a crime they didn't commit?
I gotta tell you, the first time I sat down and looked at these confessions, they are very powerfully persuasive. I'm thinking, what's the issue here? What are we talking about? These people confess.
That's my impression every time I look at what turns out to be a false confession. And the reason is you get graphic, vivid details. It's very compelling. It also can be wrong.
It happens more often than you might think. In fact, estimates are of the 100 or so cases where DNA has proved someone innocent, about 1 in 5 involved a false confession.
But how can you get the facts of the crime if you weren't there?
There's only one way. Somebody told you about it.
The police?
That's what typically happens in a false confession case.
Wise says that's just what happened to him, that police and prosecutors told him what to say. In fact, after he was arrested, but before he sat down in front of that video camera, he was brought to the scene of the crime.
Corey Wise was taken to the crime scene before giving his videotaped confession. Does that concern you at all?
In what way?
That it might color what he says in the statement?
And he's showing us where things happened.
Mm-hmm.
Do I see something wrong with that? No.
Actually, Wise says it was more like police showing him.
He said that, hey, look at it. This is where she was dragged and beat at it.
Was there still blood on the ground?
Yeah, in the grass.
You want to know from the confession, was this the culprit? Does he know the scene? If you take him there, if you show him photographs, you've not only compromised, but you've probably destroyed the diagnostic value of that confession.
These experts say, watch the way Assistant District Attorney Elizabeth Lederer questions the teenagers, especially Corey Wise.
He begins by saying she was punched in the face with a fist.
Who punched her in her face?
Steve.
And several times, Wise describes the jogger being slapped or punched. That was all.
Let me show you this picture.
Then, Lederer shows him a picture of the very badly beaten victim.
Do you know how our eyes got that way?
Moments later...
Did you see anybody with a stone or a brick or any kind of a heavy object?
Soon after that...
How did she get the injuries that she had when you finally saw her? I mean, you get a punch, you see a fighter, you get a punch, you get a bruise.
Finally, after more than an hour of questioning, is he beginning to tell the truth or to lie?
It more looks like it's like a rock.
And I'm telling you, Corey, I don't want you to think that you have to say that, but I want to know what you saw that explains how she got so badly hurt.
I did see Kevin pick up a hand rock, a small hand rock.
When I looked at this tape the first time, I say to myself, Elizabeth Leder is just doing a terrific job of getting this kid who is lying to tell the truth.
What you see is Elizabeth Lederer working like mad to try to get these kids to say things that are consistent with the facts as she knows them.
Another problem, say the experts, factual errors and inconsistencies. Lots of them.
Okay, who was the first person who got on top of her?
Richardson says it was Antron McCrae.
So Antoine got on top of her.
Santana says it was Kevin Richardson.
What was Kevin doing?
He was having sex with her.
And Wise first says it was Raymond Santana.
It was Raymond.
And then that it was someone else named Steve.
It was Steve.
At the time, prosecutors said these and other inconsistencies were minor and overwhelmed by the strength of 5 separate confessions. Prosecutors declined to talk to us because of their ongoing investigation.
You see some glaring errors. And well, how many of those details do they get wrong before you begin to suspect they weren't really there?
For example, Corey Wise describing how the jogger's pants were cut off and her legs were slashed with a knife.
Steve was using the knife to cut her legs.
In fact, everyone agrees the jogger's pants were not cut and none of her injuries were from a knife. There was no knife.
There was no knife. No but a lie.
Were you just making up some of the facts as you went along?
Just to give them what they want to hear.
Did you attack the Central Park jogger?
Yeah, I did.
Did you do it alone?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Until Matias Reyes came forward, no one in the district attorney's office gave the defendants and their families' claims of false confessions much credence. But now investigators are looking again.
I know it must have been hard to be in jail all those years. I just hope that the people in the courts, the people that got the power to do something, will put the egos aside and say, say the truth.
Antron McCrae's mother, Linda.
13 years I prayed for this day. Sorry what happened to this woman. But I'm sorry for my son to have to do 7 years of his life.
I told everybody, one day, something gonna come out and we're gonna get the victory. God gave us the victory.
The last defendant is finally released from prison. His first moments as a free man when the Central Park Jogger, a primetime investigation, continues.
For years, the Central Park Jogger case was a crime that defined an era of New York history, a time when fear and racial tension often exploded in the streets of the city. 13 years later, DNA evidence may change everything we know about that night. So what does that mean for the original defendants, the prosecution, and the question, what comes next?
When Matias Reyes confessed to the jogger rape this year, only one of the original defendants was still serving his sentence, Corey Wise. He went into prison as a teenager. He was 30 when he was released last month. These are his first moments of freedom as a grown man.
Corey!
Reunited with his mother after 13 years. He is unsteady on his feet. Of all the defendants, Corey Wise was the only one charged as an adult. As a result, he served by far the longest sentence.
Being deprived of life, it crippled me.
And what of the others? Kevin Richardson and Antron McCrae have jobs. Raymond Santana is in prison on drug charges unrelated to Central Park. Yusuf Salam, now married with 2 babies, has a college degree and is starting a business. And like the others, wants his past cleared so he can move on with his life.
What would be justice now would be for the DA's office to come out and say, we actually did these guys a great injustice.
That will be for a judge to decide. The legal standard? Is it probable this new information would have changed the outcome of the trial? The lead detective on the case says vacating the convictions would simply be wrong.
I think it'll be a sad day for New York, be a sad day for justice.
Investigators emphasize, even if a judge does vacate the convictions of the 5 young men for assault and rape of the jogger, their convictions relating to other brutal attacks in the park that night could still stand. As for Matias Reyes, a convicted rapist and murderer, believe him or not, he wants to apologize.
They never did anything bad in their life to deserve that. It was just, I was off the hook. I was out of control. There was no way that could have stopped me. And I deserve everything that has happened to me. I deserve the time. And that I'm sorry.
And finally, what about the Central Park jogger herself? She says no one cares more about the truth than she does.
Just this week, investigators told Prime Time that their own probe into what really happened to the Central Park jogger should be complete in about a month. The question is, should the 5 teenagers' convictions be vacated or not? We'll continue to follow the case, and you'll find more on this case at abcnews.com. We'll be back in a minute with a postscript about the Central Park jogger herself.
Postscript. The jogger, whose name has still not been made public, still has no memory of what happened. But for 13 years, she believed the verdict. She's now married and living outside the city. Her only visible sign from the night, a scar in her eye. There's also a visible legacy of that night in the park itself. On the dark and desolate road where the jogger was attacked, New York police continue to station a police officer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's it for us tonight. Don't forget to join us tomorrow for Good Morning America. I'm Diane Sawyer. Good night.
And I'm Charles Gibson. From all of us here at Primetime Thursday, have a good night.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source. ABC News, now traveling to all 50 states in 50 weeks in search of America.
Bonnie Hunt and Tom Hanks in the network premiere of The Green Mile, ABC Saturday.
This is the news leader, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.